It was March 8th, 2014. Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370, a Boeing 777 carrying 239 people, lifted off from Kuala Lumpur International Airport. Its destination, Beijing. It was supposed to be a routine overnight flight, the kind that happens thousands of times every single day around the globe. Families waiting, business travelers planning their next meeting, children sleeping in their seats. Nothing out of the ordinary. But within hours, MH370 would become one of the greatest mysteries in modern aviation history. A flight that should have landed safely in the Chinese capital never arrived. A plane filled with lives, stories, and futures simply vanished from the skies. At first, authorities thought it was just a minor technical issue, perhaps a communication problem. But soon, confusion turned to fear. Radar contact was lost. The aircraft had disappeared from civilian tracking. And as military data later revealed, MH370 had made unexpected turns, changing course in ways no one could explain. How could a modern aircraft, with advanced navigation and tracking systems, just disappear? No distress call, no signal, no trace, just silence. The world watched in disbelief as search and rescue operations expanded into the largest in aviation history. Dozens of nations joined forces. Satellites scanned the oceans. Ships combed through waves. Families of passengers clung to hope, waiting for answers that never seemed to come. And yet, after years of searching, only fragments of the plane were ever found, scattered across distant shores. No one knows exactly what happened that night. Was it a technical failure, a hijacking, a deliberate act, or something even more mysterious? Tonight, we step into the shadows of that fateful flight. Behind the official reports, the unanswered questions, and the theories that continue to haunt the world. This is the story of MH370, the flight that vanished. The night of March 8th, 2014 began like countless others in commercial aviation. An overnight long haul, a well-maintained Boeing 777-200ER, an experienced crew, a cabin of sleeping passengers, soft galley clatter behind a blue curtain. At 12:41 a.m. local time, Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 took off from Kuala Lumpur, bound for Beijing, with 239 souls on board. Weather was unremarkable. The flight plan was routine. Nothing about the early minutes hinted at the global mystery to come. Roughly 40 minutes after departure, the cockpit's final routine words reached controllers, a calm sign-off to Malaysian ATC before the jet was due to check in with the next center. Then, silence. On civilian radar, the aircraft's transponder, its digital name tag, stopped transmitting. The jet did not squawk an emergency code. No mayday. Just an absence where a bright icon had been. At first, that absence looked like a technical hiccup. Transponders fail. Radios crackle. But separate military primary radar, watching for raw returns, not transponder replies, later showed something much harder to dismiss. The 777 didn't continue northeast toward the South China Sea. It turned, first left, then in an arc, crossing back over the Malay Peninsula. It threaded a path that took it westbound toward the busy Strait of Malacca, then farther still. The track suggested control, not a drifting cripple. The sky, indifferent as ever, gave no hint of intent. In the cabins of the world, the clock advanced toward morning. In Beijing, families began checking arrivals. The status stayed static. then flipped. The airline's message was stark. The flight was missing. Within hours, press rooms filled, maps went up, and an absence turned into a vortex pulling in ships, satellites, aircraft, and hope. The first logistical challenge was brutally simple. Where do you look when you don't know which way the aircraft went? Because the transponder was dark, investigators had to lean on a lifeline few outside the industry had heard of: automated satellite handshakes. On long flights, the plane's satellite data unit periodically exchanged tiny bursts with a geostationary satellite, pings that didn't carry voice or position, but did confirm the hardware was alive. Engineers realized those pings contained timing and frequency clues. By analyzing how long each handshake took and the subtle Doppler shift in the carrier signal, analysts drew broad arcs, possible rings of distance from the satellite at each ping. Combined and sequenced, they narrowed to two corridors: one arcing north toward Central Asia, the other plunging south into the open Indian Ocean. No credible evidence supported a northern landing. Borders, radars, and terrain argued against a silent jumbo threading that needle. So attention turned to the south, a space so vast and empty that the word ocean feels insufficient. Even with the arcs, the southern corridor spanned an expanse that swallowed fleets. Australia, Malaysia, China, and partners staged what became the largest and most expensive search in aviation history. Satellites were queried for glints and streaks. Long-range aircraft flew expanding patterns. Ships towed side-scan sonar across seafloor ridges that no human eye had ever seen. Sophisticated bathymetry maps, entire new atlases of the seabed, were created because of a single missing flight. And for months, the only thing the ocean offered back was rough water and false leads. Then, more than a year later, a different coastline spoke. In July 2015, a large control surface known as a flaperon washed ashore on Reunion Island, east of Madagascar. Forensic work linked it to MH370. More pieces, panels, interior components, appeared along African and Indian Ocean shores. Oceanographers ran drift models backward, letting currents and winds unwind time. Their simulations pointed again to a likely impact somewhere in the remote southern Indian Ocean. But the main wreckage, the fuselage, the recorders, remained hidden beneath thousands of meters of water. For investigators, each new fragment brought both clarity and fog. The parts confirmed a southern fate. They told stories: fracture patterns, marine growth, impact dynamics. Yet none carried coordinates. And when the official investigation published its final report years later, it stopped short of a single cause. It documented a deliberate course change after the handover that never happened, acknowledged the aircraft remained airborne for hours, detailed the satellite arcs, and concluded that, with the evidence available, no single scenario could be proven. In the absence of a definitive chain, theories multiplied. Some pointed to catastrophic technical failure, a fire or systems meltdown that knocked out communications and left the jet on autopilot until fuel starvation. But that sits uneasily beside the controlled turnback and extended flight. Others suggested hypoxia, a pressurization failure that rendered everyone unconscious while the aircraft flew on. A ghost flight. That, too, struggles to explain navigational choices hinted at in the radar returns. The most scrutinized possibility has always been human agency. If a person in the cockpit deliberately altered course, turned off equipment, and flew toward empty ocean, it could align with the observed behavior. but motive, method, and certainty remain elusive. Investigators examine the crew's backgrounds, training, and even home simulators. No conclusive trigger or manifesto emerged. Unlawful interference, a hijacking or intrusion, faces its own gaps. No group claimed responsibility, and maintaining control for hours without leaving a wider trail would have been extraordinary. Beyond these, more speculative ideas bloomed. Military engagements, secret landings, exotic failures, none supported by robust evidence. Each theory explains something and collides with something else. The mystery survives in those collisions. Meanwhile, the human story ran on a parallel track. Families who first waited at arrival boards began waiting in meeting rooms, then in vigils, then in anniversaries. Some clung to any news, a satellite image here, a fisherman's tale there. Others became experts, reading drift studies and engineering reports late into the night, learning the acronyms of grief: ATSB, BTO, BFO. They formed support groups, pressed officials, funded independent analyses, and refused to let the world forget that 239 isn't a number. It's names, birthdays, empty chairs at dinners. Search crews carried their own burdens. Pilots flew exhausting patterns over empty water. Sonar operators stared at screens of monochrome seafloor, as if willing a fuselage to appear. When promising shapes emerged, weather closed in, or shadows resolved into geology. There is a particular kind of fatigue that comes from looking for a single thing in a world made of everything else. Technically, the search was a saga of pushing capability. Towed arrays mapped trenches and seamounts. Autonomous underwater vehicles skimmed near the bottom, listening and imaging. Inmarsat engineers refined their math. Oceanographers improved drift fields by validating models against the very debris they helped predict. Even regulations changed. New mandates now require more frequent position reporting and better tracking of long-haul flights over oceanic gaps. Aviation improved because of a loss it couldn't fully understand. And still, the core remains. A plane turned, flew for hours, and ended somewhere beyond reach. This is not unprecedented in the rawest sense. Oceans have buried ships and secrets for as long as humans have taken to them. But it is an affront to our age's belief that everything leaves a trail. MH370's trail is faint lines on radar plots, timestamps on satellite pings, and fragments weathered by salt. There are moments in the record that feel intimate despite the scale. The handover that never happened. The expected call to the next controller that was met with silence. The left turn back across a sleeping peninsula. A possible pass near familiar coastlines, as if the aircraft glanced home. The long, unbroken arc southward, hour after hour, into thinner air and darker water. Then, near the end, a likely fuel starvation descent. Gentle at first or chaotic, no one can say. Followed by impact dynamics we infer only through the scars on recovered parts. So much of the story is told in echoes. When people ask how such a thing can happen in an era of constant connectivity, aviation professionals answer with a map. The planet remains large. There are gaps where VHF radios go quiet, where primary radar isn't looking outward, where satellites see pings but not positions. Air travel's safety record rests on layers, not omniscience. If enough layers peel back, rarely, tragically, events can slip between them. The most honest sentences in the official summaries are also the hardest to accept. With present evidence, the cause cannot be determined. In a culture that craves culprits and closure, we don't know yet, sounds like failure. But in investigation, humility is rigor. It keeps the door open when new data appears. A fisherman's net, and autonomous drones pass over a ridge, a decision to revisit a grid with better sensors. For the families, humility is not enough. They want the box with the voices. They want the numbers tellers call black, but which are really orange, warm with the heat of answers. They want, at minimum, a place on a map. Some lead the push for renewed searches based on refined drift models and reinterpreted satellite data. Others have turned their energy inward, building memorials, scholarships, and communities of care, a lattice of meaning across the years. And aviation marches on. New jets cross the same skies daily, tracked more frequently, monitored more closely. Passengers read headlines on their phones at 35,000 feet. The signal bouncing through satellites, not unlike the one that heard MH370's final handshakes. In galleys, crews still swap stories. Some are funny, some are raw, a few are whispered. MH370 appears in those whispered ones, a reminder that certainty is a luxury, vigilance a duty, and compassion the only constant. In the end, the disappearance of MH370 is both an investigation and a parable. The investigation continues, quietly, stubbornly, in labs and models, and the minds of people who can't let go. The parable is about the limits of our reach and the cost of our blind spots. It asks what we owe to strangers we never met. But think about when we look down at a dark ocean from a pressurized tube and feel very small. Some mysteries remain unsolved, not because they are unsolvable, but because the right fragment has not yet washed ashore. The right sonar pass has not yet hummed over the right contour. Until then, the story is told in the conditional. Likely, consistent with, inferred. And in the imperative, remember. As the years passed, the mystery of MH370 only deepened. For some, the unanswered questions became an obsession. For others, the pain of uncertainty turned into a lifelong wound. Families continued to demand the truth, holding vigils, pressing governments, and refusing to let the story fade. Meanwhile, investigators revisited every possible lead. Theories multiplied. Some claimed the plane was hijacked and flown to a secret location. Others suggested a catastrophic failure at high altitude. A few even whispered of state cover-ups, claiming that certain details were being deliberately hidden from the public. But despite the wild speculation, what remained undeniable was this. In our age of satellites, radar, and constant surveillance, a massive passenger jet had vanished, almost without a trace. It was a chilling reminder of how fragile our sense of control truly is. Occasionally, fragments of wreckage washed ashore on distant beaches, flotsam that traveled thousands of miles across the ocean. Each discovery rekindled hope, but also sorrow. A torn piece of wing, a shattered fragment of cabin interior, clues that spoke of tragedy, but never of closure. In the end, MH370 became more than just a missing plane. It became a symbol of unanswered questions, of human vulnerability, and of the haunting limits of our technology. Even today, when a flight takes off and vanishes from the radar for a few moments, a shadow passes over passengers' minds. Could it happen again? And so, the story of MH370 lives on, not in the wreckage found, but in the wreckage that remains unseen. Not in the answers given, but in the silence that persists. It is a silence that echoes across oceans, across nations, and across every heart that has ever looked at the sky. and wondered what secrets it still holds. Perhaps one day, the truth will be uncovered. Perhaps the ocean will give back what it has taken. But until then, the fate of MH370 remains one of the greatest mysteries of our time, a riddle written on the waves, waiting to be solved. If you felt as excited listening to this story as I did telling it, don't forget to subscribe and give the video a like. Every day, I'll bring you a brand new story from the skies and the heart of the airports. Until our next flight together, take care.